When Fred Allen and I worked together for 2 years on The Big Show, he was certainly the Rock of Gibraltar to all of us. And I remember, as I think you probably all know, who've read so much, heard so much about him, he was a deeply religious man. And every Sunday we'd break between about 10 and 11:30, and he and his beloved Portland would go to church. And I'd always say, well, darling, burn a candle for me. And when we went to London and Paris to do The Big Show, when we were in Paris, Fred was a great walker, and he very rarely took a taxi or a car, and he wanted to find a church, and I asked him, couldn't I give them a lift in my car, and we had a French chauffeur, and he drove them to this beautiful church. And as Fred got out, he said, do you think we'll need an interpreter in there? An hour and 30 minutes, this program will present in person such bright stars as
Fred Allen,
Mindy Carson,
Jimmy Durante,
Jose Ferrer,
Portland Hoffa,
Frankie Lane,
Paul Lucas,
Ethel Merman,
Russell Knight, Danny Thomas,
Meredith Wilson.
And my name, darling, is Tallulah Bankhead.
On November 5th, 1950 at 6 p.m., NBC, in an attempt to revive the ratings in its Sunday night time slot, launched a new 90-minute star-studded program called The Big Show. It was hosted by Tallulah Bankhead, written by Goodman Ace, with music by Meredith Wilson, announced by Jimmy Wallington, and a rotating weekly cast that included everyone from Danny Thomas to Ethel Merman to Fanny Brice to Bob Hope, Groucho Marx, Eddie Cantor, Rudy Vallee, Danny Kaye, Judy Holliday, Ed Wynn, and Fred Allen. Ace had long been an admirer of Fred's work. Allen appeared on 24 of the show's 57 installments, including the landmark premiere, and showed he had not lost his trademark ad-lib skill or his wit.
It was in one of the many acerbic letters I got from Fred when I was in Hollywood that he wrote his now famous description of the West Coast. California, he said, is a wonderful place to live if you happen to be an orange. One day I asked Fred why he always typed in lowercase. Doesn't the shift key on your typewriter work, Fred? And he said, yes, but I've never been able to shift for myself.
Each episode cost over $100,000 to produce. Hopes were high. Before the show's launch, the entire cast flew out to London and Paris for a lavish publicity stunt. The British media, however, was unimpressed, and the show was a flop. The buckshot method of throwing enough stars against the wall and hoping they stuck fell on its face. Critics found the songs tuneless, the dialogue witless, and the jokes bad. It was a production that had come 10 years too late, probably. Fred Allen sensed the upcoming vitriol when in Paris he made a few cracks about the French.
In Paris, he came up with some of the funniest lines I personally have ever heard. He said that the food in Paris is served in flames. For the first time, the American in Paris enjoys food he can read by. He also had the great lines about the money. He said that, French money is made of ridiculously thin paper. And he said that it was the thinnest paper he'd ever seen in public. He also had lines like, French money is Kleenex with murals. He said he'd been blowing his nose in it for 5 days before he found out it was money. Practically nothing was sacred in that respect to Fred, and many people mistook this as bitterness, which it was not at all. It was the man's innate sense of what was comic and what was attackable in any given situation, and this included, incidentally, himself.
Amazingly, the show was brought back for a second season, but by the end, NBC had lost $1 million and made no dent into CBS's Sunday night ratings. The main reason Allen had appeared was that although he and NBC had closed the Fred Allen Show mutually in June of 1949, he was still under contract with the network. After the final broadcast on April 20th, 1952, Fred Allen was only too happy to walk away.
Fred, my darling, you fool.
Oh, yeah.
It's so nice to have you back on radio. I've missed you.
Oh, so you are the one. According to Hooper, you are the one.
No, darling, we've all missed you. Why don't you come back, Fred?
Well, I'll tell you, darling. I have been dabbling in something which, for the want of a better name, we shall call television.
Please, darling, people are eating.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say, you didn't by any chance happen to see me on my first television show, did you?
No, I didn't, Fred.
You weren't home?
Oh, yes, I was home, darling.
Oh, no set, darling?
No guts, darling.
Well, you know television's a new medium, and I have discovered why they call it a medium. Because nothing is well done. Oh, very little.
Time now for everybody's favorite guessing game, What's My Line? And now let's meet our award-winning What's My Line panel. First, the delightful star of stage and television, Miss Arlene Francis.
And now, our charming humorist, Mr. Fred Allen.
Allen did break into television, first as the MC of Judge for Yourself, and finally as a regular panel guest on the CBS quiz show What's My Line. Between 1954 and 56, he also worked as a newspaper columnist and a memoirist, renting a small New York office to work 6 hours a day without distractions. There he wrote Treadmill to Oblivion, published in 1954, which reviewed his radio and television years, and Much Ado About Me, published in 1956, which covered his childhood, vaudeville, and Broadway years. Treadmill was the best-selling book on radio's classic period for many years. When it was published, he appeared on the Tex and Jinx radio show out of WNBC in New York on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1954, to talk about his career. The show was broadcast from Peacock Alley at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. The weather was dreary, which only added to Fred's usual sense of sarcastic humor.
Could you just explain, Mr. Fred Allen, what Treadmill to Oblivion means? Why you called it that?
Well, I called it that because any successful person, or especially a comedian who gets involved in the mechanized version of the entertainment world, has to compete with the machine. And, of course, he has to lose the battle because the machine is going to survive, and the comedian... I treat comedians because I know more about them and was formerly and am currently an alleged comedian.
But Treadmill to
Well, you're on a
Oblivion.
treadmill. If you're on, we did 700 and some odd hours during the 18 years we were on radio. And ultimately, the machine is still here, the microphone is still here, and I became ill. Not from reading the jokes, but I mean from pressure and work and sustained aggravation and things like that.
I wonder if you just read the last couple of lines in your book.
Well, that tells you. When a radio comedian's, whether or not he knows it, the successful comedian is on a treadmill to oblivion. When a radio comedian's program is finally finished, it slinks down memory lane into the limbo of yesterday's happy hours. All that the comedian has to show for his years of work and aggravation is the echo of forgotten laughter and some receipts from the Treasury Department.
But that's sad.
It is sad, but it's true. Everything that's true is sad, in a way.
By 1954, Allen had already had his first heart attack. Always a letter writer, he reflected upon the lifestyle changes that he was forced to adopt to his friend, Doc Rockwell.
Doc, he says, I can't eat salt, I can't eat sugar, I can't have any meat, I can't lie on the sand, I can't go in the water. I may just as well stay down here and stay in a closet. And a sort of a prophetic little part he had in there, I don't know how it came up, but he says the way to live is to live each day as if that day may be the last, and someday you'll be right.
Taking one of his regular late-night strolls up New York's West 57th Street on Saturday night, St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 1956, Allen suffered a heart attack and died. He was 61. Fred Allen left a legacy as a profound thinker, a tireless writer, and a critic of those who he felt unjustly criticized him. As word spread around the entertainment community, all those who knew him mourned. Jack Benny was profoundly shaken. In truth, as funny as Jack Benny was, his humor was never exactly the same afterwards without his old sparring partner. During the following night's regular Sunday broadcast of What's My Line at 10:30 p.m., barely 24 hours following Allen's death, host John Daly preceded the program with a special message to the viewing audience. Steve Allen took Fred's place on the panel.
This is a melancholy time for us, as I'm sure it is for you. I'm sure most of you know that during last night, Fred Allen passed away. It was our thought that tonight we would invite some of Fred's old friends here and we'd talk about Fred, his contributions to American humor and American culture. Or perhaps we would go into the library of film, which we have, excerpt it and tell something of the story of Fred Allen and the great contributions that he made to our industry. Mrs. Allen, the beloved Portland, specifically has asked us not to do that. It was her feeling that if we wished to pay tribute to Fred, the best tribute we could pay him would be to do this program just as if he were here with us. Fred was a professional performer, and he did a great many shows, I'm sure, when he didn't feel like laughing. But he did them, and we're going to try to do them in that same tradition. And so, for Arlene Francis and Steve Allen, an old friend who was kind enough to come and help us tonight, and Dorothy Kilgallen and Bennett Cerf, we are going to do What's My Line the way Fred would have liked to have had it done.
During the final 90 seconds of the program, Steve Allen, Bennett Cerf, and Arlene Francis gave brief but heartfelt tributes to Fred. He was buried at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York. Both his real and stage names are engraved on his headstone.
One of the most touching things was coming back to this office the Tuesday after Fred had died. He'd been there on Saturday. We hadn't been in the office for, 6 or 7 days. And we never quite were sure when Fred had been in the office. We knew he was there every day, and yet there was never any sign that Fred had occupied this place, except if you knew Fred. Everything was neat as a pin. The dust was still neat. He disturbed so little, and yet disturbed so much with his tremendous talent. But personally, he was the most methodical in the finer sense of what methodical means, rather than against the drudgery sense of it. We walked in that following Tuesday and opened the refrigerator, and there were the 2 bottles of apple juice and the 4 or 5 pieces of fruit and the little container of cottage cheese. And in the bottom of the wastebasket, which was quite clean, were a few little shavings from the pencils he had sharpened, the last pencils he had sharpened. But when I opened the secretary drawer, and in it were 12 brown paper bags neatly folded. These were the bags with which he had brought to work the fruit, the apple juice, and so on. He never threw them away in case we might possibly need them.
And on the big show, there was a theme song written by Meredith Willson that we always ended the show with. And I would like to end this tribute by quoting the last line on the big show. May the good Lord bless and keep you until we meet again. Good night, darling.
So what is Fred Allen's legacy? Well, in his time, he drew praise from his peers, as well as mayors, presidents, and writers whose work is taught in every American high school. In fact, his good friend John Steinbeck once wrote that Fred Allen was unquestionably the best humorist of our time. His Town Hall Tonight news segments influenced people in productions like Johnny Carson, Jack Parr, David Letterman, and Saturday Night Live. Even those in our audience who don't consciously know they've been influenced by Fred Allen have been. He has 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one for radio and one for television. And he was inducted into the National Radio Hall of Fame in 1988. If Fred was incorrect about one thing, it's that when he stepped off that treadmill to oblivion in 1949, he wasn't forgotten. His humor continues to live on, as does his legacy, as one of the most well-read, best ad-libbing, iconic entertainers of the 20th century. And speaking of iconic entertainers from the 20th century.
Well, good evening, Bing.
Good evening, Fred.
Say, that applause had a lot of life to it. Did you sense it as I walked on?
It did,
the
Bill.
electric quality?
It did, Bill.
Did you have it transcribed out in sunny California for release here in the gloom of West 48th Street?
Next time on Breaking Walls, a station monopoly complaint filed by the Mutual Broadcasting System with the FCC in 1934 leads to RCA selling its secondary chain, the NBC Blue Network. By June of 1945, the new head, Edward J. Noble, rebranded the network as the American Broadcasting Company, and with the help of Bing Crosby's Philco Radio Time, forever altered how radio shows were produced and broadcasted through one word: transcription. The reading material used in today's episode was The Encyclopedia of Old-Time Radio by John Dunning, Treadmill to Oblivion and Much Ado About Me, both by Fred Allen. Selected music featured in today's episode was Swingin' on a Star by Bing Crosby, and Over There, recorded live by George M. Cohan. I'd like to thank Larry and John Gassman as well as Walden Hughes for their continued help and support. They host a program, by the way, on the Yesterday USA Radio Network, which you can visit at yesterdayyusa.com. The three gentlemen are also members of SPERVAC, the Society to Preserve and Encourage Radio, Drama, Variety, and Comedy. They're having their next convention this coming November 1st through the 3rd at the Crown Plaza Hotel at 3131 Bristol Street in Costa Mesa, California. For more information, please go to spurvac.com. I'd also like to thank both of our sponsors for the episode, the Fireside Mystery Theater and 12 Chimes It's Midnight. Both podcasts can easily be found on iTunes. I'd finally like to thank you, the listening audience. Your feedback has been tremendously galvanizing, and I'm going to keep pushing forward because since December 1st of last year, monthly plays and downloads for Breaking Walls are up over 1,500%. That means that our audience is 15 times what it was just 6 months ago. Thank you. Breaking Walls episode number 82 will detail the breakup of MVC's dual network powerhouse, which gave rise to the American Broadcasting Company. This episode will be available beginning August 1st, 2018. In the meantime, the final 2 episodes of A Man Named Marlowe, our audio drama miniseries set in 1935 Los Angeles and featuring Raymond Chandler's famous private eye, Philip Marlowe, they'll be out in July. Those 2 episodes will premiere on July 8th and July 22nd. Both shows are available in the same feed and can be subscribed to by searching for Breaking Walls everywhere you get your podcasts or at thewallbreakers.com. If you listen to Breaking Walls on your iPhone through iTunes, give me a quick rating. Each rating helps jigger the iTunes algorithm into action and helps more people who'd potentially love to know about the golden age of radio discover this show. And if you've got some spare change, you can become a Patreon supporter for as little as $1 a month by going to patreon.com/thewallbreakers. I'll be updating the Patreon feed with new goodies this Independence Day weekend. And by the way, can you believe it's already July? Time flies on this treadmill to oblivion called life. But until July 10th for episode 5 of A Man Named Marlowe, and until August 1st for Breaking Walls episode number 82, my name is James Scully. This has been Breaking Walls episode number 81. I hope you have a wonderful Independence Day weekend. If you're here in the good old US of A, catch some rays, catch some hugs, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Thank you very much.